Your parents were too busy. Your education let you down. People told you culture wasn't for you. But you're not stupid, and this stuff's really interesting. Join us for some drinking and thinking about the best of 5,000 years of human civilization. After all, it belongs to you.
Good morning.
Here you are. Besides me, like some monstrous man-goat satire, as drunk as Silenus himself. Now, I called you a satire, and that's exactly the subject of today's podcast. As you say, we're doing another fairly early recording today, because we're both quite busy. I guess the starting point is, what is satire?
Well, I noticed you've made a clever joke, a play on words.
I'm glad you got it.
Which I can see.
Not too early in the day for you.
Down, but perhaps you want to explain for our listeners at home.
So the word satire initially comes from these figures in Greek mythology who were sort of, hairy, sort of were-goats, I suppose is the best way of describing it. Drunken, mischievous, randy, lecherous, hairy goat men, basically. And indeed that's where the expression "he's a bit of a goat" comes from. And
at 4 o'clock in the morning, town centre of any of Britain's
you can
large
see
towns,
them. Exactly.
You can see them making their way back, kebab in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. We've all been there. There's nothing wrong with that. This then started to be the subject of the sort of light relief play that would be in the Greek drama festivals that we talked about on previous podcasts. You get your trilogy of tragedies, and then everyone's dead or has had sex with their own mother or killed their own father or whatever. It's all a bit much. So to lighten the mood, there would be what was called a satire play. And then slowly but surely this turned into, we got the comedies of Aristophanes, which you might describe as satirical, so starting to get closer to the modern sense of the word of basically taking the piss.
Yeah.
But there's another term, another use of the word in Latin when we get into the Roman era, which means a specific sort of poetry. And initially it's about how long the poems are and the metre that they're written in. But again, the meaning sort of shifts over time until it becomes closer to what we would think.
Well, I suppose
as satire.
The satire play at the end of these hard-going, gritty plays is a bit like the other way round of showing the Mickey Mouse before the main filter.
Right, exactly.
You have this in the 1940s and 1950s. I do think that modern cartoons have sort of gone right from Steamboat Willie up to some pretty biting stuff.
That's right. I mean, whether this will still be necessary in the age of CGI and deep fakes. I was looking at some interesting deep fakes online last night.
I bet you were. I bet you were. You randy goat man.
So, anyway, without further ado, let's crack on to talk about Roman satire.
Yeah, so carpe diem.
Now, hang on just a minute. Explain what you mean by carpe diem. My Latin's a bit rusty.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, even you've seen, Dead Poets Society, haven't you?
A classic film.
Classic. A very good, absolutely. In fact, we almost ended up on a long discourse on that. There's a wonderful scene at the beginning where the English teacher, the inspirational English teacher...
played by the late, great Robin Williams.
The late, great Robin Williams. Yeah, is supposed to read a book on a chapter of a book on how poetry is measured its worth, and there's a sort of graph that it's plotted on. And he says, it's absolutely nonsense, boys. And he sort of takes everybody off to look at pictures in the corridor and really sort of evokes this sort of idea that poetry is something you feel rather than something that can be measured. Yeah. And he sort of breathes these words, carpe diem, seize the day. Okay, and so it's a phrase which comes from Horace, first chapter we're looking at, and I suppose nowadays...
I didn't actually know that it's Horace who first said that.
It is Horace. Well, it's not Horace who first said it, but it's Horace who popularised it.
Right.
And of course nowadays, for people you're slightly younger than me, I suppose it would be hashtag YOLO. You only live once.
Sure.
So, and it's exactly the same idea, which is, and this is why when I do tweet, which is very rarely, it's always hashtag carpe diem. Because you've got to set some standards, haven't you?
Absolutely.
But that very sense, seize the day, go out and do something, you're going to be dead soon. And Horace is actually full.
Well, the way you're drinking, I think.
Indeed. Well, it is a bit early. Horace is actually full, as we'll discover, of these little famous phrases which have come down to us, which we're still using, and we'll encounter several as we talk through. Horace himself is actually a really interesting chap. He is the son of a freed slave. A freedman, but he's not ashamed to admit it. Normally, this is a bit of a social taboo. It's kind of understood that, obviously, if you're a slave, that's terrible. If
you're the lowest in society.
The lowest in society. If you're a freedman, well done, but there are still things you can't do because you used to be a slave. And that continued until your children, and it's only really when you get to 2 generations away that essentially you're sort of acceptable, although clearly it will still be held against you by the more snobby elements of society.
It's like if you come from Birmingham or something.
Exactly the same.
It's interesting to see how snobby the Roman world was, very, very much like how snobby our society is today.
Yeah, but he doesn't care. That's the thing. He knows that he has this black mark against him. He sort of wears it. He owns it. Like one of those people who's curiously proud of coming from the West Midlands, you know?
Any listeners from the West Midlands? I totally dissociate myself from that last comment.
Birmingham is in the West Midlands.
Absolutely.
You started it.
My father came from the West Midlands. So,
so you're the son of a freedman.
I'm a new man, yeah.
Okay, but anyway, he is the son of a free slave, and he is not ashamed to admit it. I think partly because there was no point hiding it, so he embraced it. He wasn't going to let it hold him back. In fact, he went on and he studied at Plato's Academy in Athens, which, for our listeners' sake, we've sort of mentioned it a little time, but Plato himself, the great philosopher, possibly one of the two people who have a claim, along with Socrates, to be the greatest of philosophers, in the imagination, in the pantheon. We might argue over the next few weeks as to whether there might be anyone better.
Indeed.
But Plato and Socrates are the big boys. He founded a school called the Academy, and Horace gets in, and he does some pretty heavy drinking and thinking with...
I should hope so too.
Absolutely. With actually Cicero's son. Now, our listeners
we
will remember
met him,
Cicero.
didn't we?
I've lost track whether that was the last episode or the episode
next
before,
week's episode, possibly.
Could be anything, okay? If we haven't encountered Cicero yet, the man's a ledge. If we have, you'll remember he's a ledge. His son, we don't know how legendary he was, but we do know that he hung around and drank a lot of Horace. It just goes to show the interconnectedness of all these podcasts.
It's a small world, isn't it? Yeah.
Everything's beyond epic. Everything beyond the Epic of Gilgamesh. Pretty much we've mentioned how they're interrelated or overlapping. It's incredible to think the sheer explosion in imagination and human creativity that happened in this short period. We've barely moved a few hundred years since we've started, and we've got thousands of years left to go in human history.
And also, it's not just that the writers hang out and know each other. It also intersects with the politics. I mean, quite a few of the people we're going to talk about today, who are famous, and we're looking at them as writers, but they met and interacted with the great kind of political figures of the time that we're also hearing about.
Well, interesting you say that, because here's an intersection with the great events of history and politics. Brutus, he who famously was the last man to stab Caesar, not the only man, stabbed a man when he's down, but he, after he had called upon Cicero to restore the Republic, it didn't go quite well for him. There were some ructions we've mentioned with Mark Antony, and anyway, Brutus ended up having to flee Rome for his own safety, where he headed to Athens, as many civilized people would. And he decided that he was going to muster a force to take back Rome from the encroaching power of the Caesarian party, and this is the beginning of this great civil war, which will now last for at least a decade and a half, 2 decades.
But being Brutus, where does he go to recruit his army?
Well, he goes to university, basically. Because
it's interesting, isn't it, that he does that?
I think it's because he's looking for noble men. Again, Brutus is a snob. He's a descendant of the man.
He's an intellectual, isn't he?
Yeah, he is highborn. He is practically royalty, if you excuse the sort of irony, because he is a direct descendant of the man who bears exactly the same name as him, who killed the last king of Rome. We're going to come back to the kings of Rome later on today, actually. Anyway, Brutus tries to drum up support, gets Horace on side, who joins the army and fights actually at the Battle of Philippi. Which is a huge battle between the Republican forces, the ones who the Pompeian faction, although Pompey is dead by now.
Pompey.
I know you love him. Against the forces, the Caesarian forces, Octavian and Mark Antony,
who are on the same side at the moment.
At the same side at the moment, yeah. And it's at this battle that he first comes up with another zinger: "Dulce et decorum est pro patria more."
Oh, right. So, this is the last line of the famous Wilfred Owen poem, which is pretty much the only thing that we ever studied in history at school.
It's written.
It's so overworked.
Your school, if it was founded before 18, will have a war memorial.
Right.
On that war memorial, it will probably be written. If your school wasn't, you'd have walked past one in a village where you live. Every village in the country, either has "their name liveth forevermore," a biblical quote, or this quote from Horace.
Right.
So you may have encountered this.
But it's interesting because Wilfred Owen in the poem, he's basically saying that is a lie, and look how terrible it is to actually die for your country in war. Interestingly, he himself did fight bravely in the First World War and die. And
very ironically, Horace, who means it absolutely seriously, and of course Owen can only quote riff on that and make that point because by his time, this poem by Horace is so well known.
Right.
Whereas Horace, apparently, and it freely admits it, not a great military man, lost his shield within the first 5 minutes of the battle and ran away.
He lost his shield and his ship, basically, didn't he? And he clegged it.
He clegged it. Now, he does survive, and he's friends with Virgil.
Okay. Who we've already met.
Okay, and we spent quite a lot of time with, okay? So again, just goes to show how interconnected this intelligentsia.
Cracking drinking sessions, those two,
I think
they? They must have been, their repartee, can you imagine? It would have been up there with...
Virgil at your dinner party.
The two of us.
We've said that Cicero's at the dinner party. I mean, Virgil's a good shout.
That's an interesting one.
We do have another 2,000 years to go.
How many spots have we got at this dinner party?
3. We said 3.
I haven't agreed to 3. I think this needs to be a Trimalchian dinner party with quite a few spaces, but...
Well, we basically invite everyone, don't we? Pretty much. Okay, he's friends with Virgil, and through Virgil meets Maecenas. Now, you're going to encounter Maecenas when you get to Rome Series 2, which I've now lent you the box.
Oh, yeah, it's over there, isn't it? I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, good, excellent, great stuff. What does the missus, the actual classicist in the family, think of it?
Yeah, she's unfortunately a couple of episodes behind me, so we're not able to watch together. We're sort of watching in different rooms at the moment, and
It's the story of your marriage.
But no, it's great.
Good, excellent. So, Maecenas...
You're not getting those DVDs back.
Is effectively Augustus's, the Emperor Augustus, against Octavian, currently with Mark Antony. They fall out, he becomes the emperor, and Maecenas becomes his sort of minister of culture.
Right.
And through Maecenas, through Virgil, who's very in with Augustus's crew, essentially Horace also makes contacts in a new imperial regime.
He sort of switched sides, really.
Well, he happily sells out.
Right,
I mean, the man is so easy to relate to because he's good. Local boy made good, fallen in with the right crowd, gone to the right university. He is like Charles Ryder in Brideshead Revisited.
Ah,
now,
interesting.
We'll get to Brideshead Revisited in about 23 years.
Okay? At this rate.
But essentially, he is the sort of grammar school boy, not even that really, who has then fallen in the right crowd.
With the posh crowd.
Right. And absolutely goes for it. And
again, a bit like you, I can see the... But
helped by the fact that Augustus himself has actually got a bit, even though he's into the arts, has actually got slightly crude tastes.
Is that right?
So yeah. I think that's why Horace gets a look in. We'll talk about his crudeness anyway. So he sells out. Horace writes poems praising Augustus and the new regime, completely swap sides. He gets given a farm, he gets given a knighthood, and he also gets given a charming nickname by Augustus himself. The emperor himself gives you a nickname. What nickname do you want it to be? It's like Old Iron Balls or, my dear and trusted friend. No, his nickname is Tiny Cock.
Which is also ironic, because that was your nickname at school.
History rhymes, doesn't it? It's like poetry, it rhymes. Anyway, Horace follows Maecenas around, and interestingly is a witness to some of the greatest events in history. If I invent my time machine, I basically need to take the place of Horace, because the things he gets to see and not write anything about is enviable. In fact, perhaps I actually have taken the time machine at some point to him, because it would explain why nothing good was written about it, because obviously I don't have his talent.
It's amazing, isn't it? He's at Philippi, but he doesn't, apart from this sort of one line about, I lost my shield. He doesn't. There's no great epic poem about it. Would it be quite useful
epic poem about the fall of the Roman Republic? He's not at. He is also at the Battle of Actium, the sea battle, in which Mark Antony and Octavian fight for supremacy, and in which the empire is founded. He's there. Doesn't mention. Okay. He's there.
Presumably, he's sitting a long way behind the lines, scribbling about some,
He's down below
poem,
in the heads.
Some poem about sheep or something.
Yeah. He then follows Maecenas and Virgil with Augustus down to southern Italy to sign the peace treaty, the Treaty of Tarentum between Augustus and Mark Antony. Doesn't mention anything politically or interesting, but he does write a comic poem about a wet dream.
Yeah. Right, so, this was bizarre as well. He's there with Virgil. Again, you'd expect this that we'd get some quite...
the two greats, Virgil and Horace.
We'd get some intellectual fireworks here. What does he write about? A wet dream.
Yeah.
But just to interrupt you for a second, this wine which we're drinking, I chose this in honour of that wet dream, because he had that wet dream in the Brundisium region of southern Italy, and this is from Brindisi. This is a really nice red wine from Brindisi. So, in honour of a 2,000-year-old wet dream, cheers to you, Horace. Nunc est bibendum.
Yeah, Nunc est bibendum. Well, yes, and another Horatian phrase.
Which means, just for those of us whose Latin is non-existent,
let's drink.
Let's drink.
So, let's drink, seize a day. He's got them all. He's also a talented writer. And this is something where I admit that I'm very dependent on classical scholars rather than something that I can note myself. But everyone agrees that his use of subtle metrical effects and his allusions to poems about life, this is one of his ones where we've discussed before. For someone coming to this new, do you really need to understand it all? Right. I have a good dictionary, a Penguin dictionary of classical allusions, and I also have the Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable, which every house should have a copy of, by the way.
Profanosaurus Rex as well.
But there's so much being referenced. Now, I'd agree that I don't think you actually need to know this. You can get that he is referencing something which clearly is meaningful here. I don't know what it means, but
there is stuff lost in translation.
I think there's a lot of stuff lost in translation. I think Horace is harder a little because he's so embedded in the wider writing of his time. And stylists say that he had a superb command of the Latin language. Right. But of course, as someone whose Latin went up to sort of year 9, I remember there was an eruption in Pompeii and Caligula was killed, and then his son spent 2 years wandering around a garden, actually quite close to where I live now, where Cogidubnus Rex lived.
And a dog called Argos. Well, at least you were lucky enough to be taught some Latin. I've got absolutely no Latin at all.
I was lucky, but it basically just enables me to pretty much read what's written on gravestones. Basically, I cannot read Horace. Right. And you're right. And most people won't have even the paltry attempt that I squandered the opportunity of. Anyway, people who did read Latin were, of course, many English aristocrats of 17th, 18th, 19th century. 17th century onwards, people become very obsessed with Greek and Latin. They've got really interested in the classics. We get words appearing in English, which there's a deliberate attempt to make English sound more civilized. Right. So new words appear, which are Latinized.
Very interestingly, that's exactly what Horace did for Latin, because he had all these Greek poets that he was reading, and he was like, I've got Latin doesn't let me do this, so I'm going to invent some new words, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The civilised Englishman of the 18th century saw Horace as a proto-English gentleman, because he too was civilised. He was ironic. He was sophisticated. He was country-loving. There was a deep love of the pastoral in the way that aristocrats often, and of course Horace is not an aristocrat, but he's writing for aristocrats. Look to the country, to their estates, to this idea, escaping from all this clamour in the city. Now, does that translate today?
Doesn't speak to me.
We're recording in London this much. Right. I mean, do you feel the pull of the hills of Snowdonia, their beautiful sheep,
to be honest, even going out to Zone 2 is a bit of a struggle for me. The hills of Hampstead is that's a bit too rural as far as I'm concerned.
So I think there's probably we have that stuff is lost in translation here, but B, he is out of fashion by the topics of what he's writing about. But he was in fashion before.
For a very long time.
Perhaps
I'm sure
when civilization collapses or the internet enables us all to work from home and cities depopulate, and we have seen that happen across the world. So in America, there are cities which are depopulating. If we enter either through a utopia or a dystopia, a world where we are a bit more connected and the population density goes down, perhaps Horace will speak to us.
Extinction Rebellion. I mean, Horace would probably have voted Green. I'd like to think. He absolutely loves his sort of.
Well, he'd have told his friends he's voted Green, but he would have voted Tory.
But this is.
Having been a Labour voter in his youth.
In his youth, yes, he's ratted out because he's got this nice fat pension from Emperor Augustus.
He's a
he knows which side his bread is buttered. I mean, this is interesting. You talked about the fashion for 100 years. So one of my heroes, Byron, who we're going to come onto in a subsequent podcast. For me, this stuff does get lost in translation. This stuff, we're always saying to the listeners, don't be scared of this. This is for you.
Yeah, be scared of this.
I think you can be a bit scared of this. Well, or maybe just a bit bored by it. I mean, Byron wrote a poem about Horace, and there are all sorts of jokes about using the same metre or whatever, but basically he says, farewell, Horace, I hated you, not because there's anything wrong with you, but because I understood what you were doing, I just didn't like it.
Yeah, it's like, clever.
Yeah. That's but
of course, if you can't read Latin, which most of us can't,
it's hard to get
then
even
the clever.
It
means nothing to me. And well, we say that we're talking about the overview of Horace.
Right.
There are things within Horace which are absolutely brilliant. And actually, I want to turn to why Horace is not as dull as we might be making him seem, because he was actually a little bit of a dirty boy, a bit filthy. Now he's mentioned in Suetonius's, who writes a life about him. So Suetonius is a great biography. He writes famously The Lives of 12 Caesars, which we're coming to shortly. Great book.
But he also wrote Lives of Poets, didn't he?
Yeah, he was.
And also, I think he wrote a lost Lives of the Prostitutes, monks, which it's such a shame that doesn't survive. I would love to read his lives. Of
Amazingly,
the
the monks didn't deserve that, or it's probably in the bunghole in some waiting to be found in Italy. But Suetonius was kind of like he was a sort of like the 3 a.m. column in the Sun. We think of him as we see his marble bust of him, but he was writing scurrilous stuff. Yeah. He was Daily Mail author of the year.
He would have been in and out of the libel courts, wouldn't he, if he was writing today?
Suetonius says of Horace, he liked his flute girls, and he had a bedroom covered in pornographic frescoes and mirrors.
This idea of pornographic frescoes, it's like, sort of kind of top shelf, particularly lewd marble statues that he's got around the place, or, a rather racy mosaic has been installed in his bathroom.
But you see, there's a lot of it going around, because of course he's writing around about the era of Augustus, but Tiberius, who's the next emperor, famously disappears off to Capri, where his entire,
he's full of that.
His whole accommodation, his vast palace, which is essentially embarrassing to people. And the Romans are pretty liberal.
Right.
They come over.
It's like Hugh Hefner style interior decor, basically.
It's filthy. So there's an interesting shift going on. I suppose it's a bit like the Victorian era, where there's this claim under Augustus that there's a sort of back to basics moral stance. But actually, if you read the texts which have come down to us, and you look at some of the the remains of the buildings we found, actually we see that there's a do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
But
particularly
Horace,
for the high ups in society.
Yeah, so Horace, absolutely filthy, and it's those filthy poems I'm commending to our listeners.
Which are not what he's most famous for, right? No. But perhaps they're the place you should start.
Dolce Decoro Est, great stuff. Yeah, very good.
Yeah,
very worthy. Okay, but I would strongly recommend that you take our recommendation. So he comes up with this new form of satire poems. You talked about how satire emerges. Satire 1.2 is the one that we were looking at, isn't it?
Right.
1.2. I don't know what the nomenclature is here.
Yeah.
But he starts talking about flute girls. It's his old favourite. Okay.
Yeah. Which basically prostitutes, right? I assume.
They're musicians who play music. But I think it's understood.
The point is they're available.
They are available.
Right.
They are available. They have an actual job. They are available.
It's funny, isn't it, that it's flutes, because we think
I don't think it is funny. It's flutes.
I think it's highly
suggestive that it's
right.
flutes.
Interesting. Because these days I'm not sure that it's a bit like the bit in American Pie, isn't it? There was this one time at a band camp.
Yeah.
But it's the idea it's the flautists are the really dirty. I would have said it was the cellists.
That was the flautist ones, actually.
Oh really? Did you?
Yeah. So it definitely is the flute girl. Okay. And in this poem, Horace mentions that Cato, again we've encountered before, is in favour of brothels as at least better than adultery. He's making
like Juno's cunts.
Yeah. But he goes, come on, guys, we can acknowledge the brothels aren't great, but we need to make a case for the brothels because they're better than adultery. Not because adultery is morally wrong, because adultery comes with the chance of getting caught. Okay, and if you get caught, you end up with a beating, or worse still, buggery.
Yeah, this was bizarre. The idea that you're going to caught
intellectually, and the man goes, right, I'll show you. Again, just yet another example of how Roman civilization seems so close to ours,
and yet so far away. I believe that there was actually a punishment for adultery, which was to have a mullet, a fish, basically shoved up there, shoved up your bum. That was illegal. That was a legal punishment.
And now you have to pay for that. But he also points out, some people are castrated. So he makes an argument using the Aristotelian golden mean argument. He basically says, on balance, look, you're better off doing this thing than that thing, and some of this things you're better off doing about is brothels rather than adultery. And indeed, he talks about an analysis between which are better, posh girls or dirty sluts.
Right.
Now, it's a timeless argument,
Right.
I'm
not sure Aristotle really, when he came up with the theory of the golden mean, assumed that it was going to be deployed to decide whether it's better to go.
Well, he should have foreseen it.
He should have done. Yeah.
Horace says that Sallust has the right idea, not worrying too much about a girls' class. In one of these poems, he often mentions other people, contemporaries of the time, writing to give them direct advice on their sex lives. One suspects unwelcome.
Thanks for
and in public, he says, "Don't worry about a girls' class." We infer perhaps he's making a sort of cheeky reference to the fact that Sallust has ended up with married down,
right?
And he pictures Sallus's cock saying, what are you doing? I'm Randy, and I don't care if this cunt is descended from a consul, okay? And he said, when it comes down to it, we fancy, when we're in the mood, we're in the mood. All of this highfalutin Roman stuff can just go ham, which is interesting, because of course it's Augustus who's pushing all of that, and he is in Augustus's pay.
It's really
but
interesting.
It seems to me that Augustus, as I said, is keeping him a bit
joke.
of a pet.
Right.
Because he quite likes the fact that there's a slightly low-born person writing these hilarious things against other people, which includes him. In the same way as I imagine Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn buy Private Eye, because they love seeing the critique of their colleagues and recognise that comes with the fact that they are open
They're going to get it
and
themselves.
if they banned it, they would lose more than they would gain. So I think Augustus, fair play to him, is kind of... It is in favour of the freedom of the press, where Horace is concerned, not in general.
Right.
So, yeah, in fact, Horace goes on to talk about a chap who falls in love with a stripper, for example.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was interesting, because we've got a friend. We've got a friend which will remain nameless for the purpose of this podcast, but John, if you're listening...
remain nameless, but it's the most common British name.
Actually, the most common British name is Mohammed now.
Only if you count all variant spellings. Which I accept, because it's an Arabic. There we are.
So, so this friend of ours, I still can't get my head around this. He had a similar sort of situation, didn't he, where he fell in love with a stripper.
Well, he went to not a brothel, but a strip joint. One of those ones where
it was a sufficiently
the flute girls were available.
Right, yeah, I think it was. And he did the one thing that he was never supposed to do. He fell wildly in love with one of the strippers, who was a very nice lady.
Strippers don't deserve love.
No, of course they do, but possibly
not
not from their clients.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they've heard it all before. This was the most pathetic thing I think he's done. He's done some pretty pathetic low-life things in his life, but amazingly turned this around. I still can't get my head around this. So the stripper in question was called Anal Storm, and this is in itself fascinating to me. Are we talking about a nom de plume here, or is it nominative determinism? In other words, there's this theory that if you're born with a certain name, that you sort of inadvertently live up to it.
So do you mean in the West Country Gazette there was to Mrs. Storm, a daughter,
Anal. Yeah, and then she thought, it's going to be hard to be, an accountant with a name like that. I'll go into the stripping business. Or
one suspects it's a nom de guerre.
Right, and so, and it's a very good one. I mean, it's quite sophisticated. Anal Storm. But to be fair, you say that, Anal Clooney. It's not a common name, but it's not unknown. So Anal Storm. He fell in love with Anal Storm, and he wrote her a poem. I mean, in the Horatian style, he wrote her a poem, and it worked. And he ended up going out with her briefly for about 5 minutes. But she was very nice. I just don't understand how did that work?
Well, Horace would have approved.
Horace would have approved. Presumably, no one had ever written her a poem in the Horatian style before, and she was genuinely touched. Whether she lived up to her name, I don't think.
John, if you're listening, write
in and tell us. Or Anal, if you're listening. I mean, but fair play to both of them. It's a shame it didn't work out.
Well, the point is...
Can you rescue me from this?
The point is that he'd rather...
Was that the time that... Because
that was in Bristol.
Yeah.
That was it. Let's move on.
So I was once saying...
The point Horace is making is that he'd rather fuck his maid or a slave girl than some posh girl because it comes with fewer complications. Just in the same way, he'd rather go to a brothel than he would take on an expensive mistress. Why bother with that?
Right. Or a slave boy, to be fair.
And a slave boy. And he writes, giving the same advice to the whole upper class of Rome about their individual thing. He's basically going... Maecenas, I hear that you've got a wife. She's a haughty cow. Why not you go for the slave boy? And everyone's going, oh, Horace, you
cheeky monkey.
Yeah. So this stuff's great, and it's really
short. It's quite fun, actually, yeah.
Because it's just so impudent and filthy.
It is pretty filthy, yes.
Yeah. But yes, more than favour of buggering the slave boy, that sort of thing. That's the advice. That's the advice he's coming. That is he is the dear Deirdre of the classical Rome, or late classical Rome, and
so look, have you ever been in a situation like this?
Of buggering an underage slave boy?
No, I didn't mean that. I meant of being this idea of being caught in flagrante or there being a situation of adultery where you're found out, but either as the as the person committing the adultery or as the cuckold in the scenario.
No, I can't. I've never
You've never been caught in the act.
Not in the act, but immediately after the act.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but where the act could have been reasonably deemed to have occurred.
Was anyone else involved in this situation? So I've been in exactly this situation, right? So
You surprised me.
When I was at school,
Was there anyone else involved?
there was someone else involved in the situation, and I had to bundle her out through. I mean, we're
was
married,
your
happily
nanny.
married now.
Yeah.
I had to bundle her out of the back door as my entire family came in through the front door. There was seconds to spare. I think we got away with it, but yeah. It was an extremely awkward moment.
If your parents are listening, please write in.
God,
Did he get away with it?
I hadn't thought of that.
Have you always known? Please write a Horatian, Horatian poem about the
Exactly. Anyway, it's not worth being called. He's got a point, I think we can say.
Anyway, back to Horace. So these racy short poems that we're going on, which are called the Epodes, is that how we say it? Or
Epodes? I'm not sure.
Epodes.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
You're the Latinist, I do.
Well, yeah, it sounds sort of Greek, doesn't it?
Epodes. Yeah, it must be.
Yeah, anyway, but they're quite dirty, they're scurrilous, they're fun. My favourite one, I think, is the Ode to Garlic.
It's good, that, isn't it?
It's, he sort of goes... he talks...
Again, it's sort of Maecenas again, isn't it? It's like, Maecenas, your girlfriend's never going to want to kiss you if you've been at the garlic,
Yeah,
you know?
it's exactly that. There's nothing more to it. It's talking about how garlic interferes with lovemaking. Now, you might go, well, that's fairly obvious. Well, maybe it's fairly obvious because Horace wrote
It's probably the first time
2,000 years
ago.
Yeah. But he is really against garlic.
He doesn't. He really doesn't like it, does he? And he even describes it as because we've already talked about the Medea in a previous podcast. I like the bit where he says that it must have been garlic that Medea smeared on that shawl that she gave to her to her rival that poisoned her. That was really funny.
If you remember, the daughter of... Oh gosh, who was it? The king of
Creon, Creon's daughter.
Creon's daughter. She melts basically, wearing a shawl and a crown, which that event of 3 or 4 episodes ago is alluded to, and Horace says it all down to the garlic, which he does not like.
He clearly doesn't like his garlic.
My other favourite, Ode to an Ancient Toothless Whore.
Yes,
which
highly
is
sophisticated.
pretty brutal. Where he basically talks about how someone, you're so ugly. You're really going to have to be going at it to suck me off in order to overcome how wrinkled and smelly you are.
Oh, yeah.
But the last line is, if you're going to get anywhere, you're going to have to work hard with your mouth.
Oh, God.
You stink.
And you've only got one tooth. So, look, I'd admit this is hilarious, but unlike last time... Is it art? Yeah. Last time we were talking about Roman poetry, we were talking about Ovid and Catullus, who were equally filthy, but we were defending them from the charge of misogyny on the grounds that they clearly loved women, they respected women, they were interested in women, they wanted there to be equality between the sexes in the bedroom, as it were. I don't get that sense with Horace. Am I being unfair to him? I mean, this is quite old-fashioned stuff, isn't it?
This is the sort of stuff...
It's like 70s sort of...
If you found the library at school in the section club, that no one really looks at anymore, right. You titter at, and you're right.
As a schoolboy,
as a schoolboy, I'm not sure it's any more sophisticated than that. I'm not sure there's any more hidden meaning. Oh, but if you understand the literary themes he's making.
No, there was a Euripides reference in that Ode to a Wrinkled Old Whore.
And in his more serious work, it's full of references.
But I would love to see how that stood up against John's Ode to Anal Storm, because which I assume was a lot more moving.
Well, that's episode 100.
Right. I hope that poem survives, for posterity.
One just can't imagine it. You've gone and watched Medea. By Euripides, you've gone and seen the Sophoclean plays, and now for something completely different, Horace is going to read
Ode to a wrinkled old, smelly old woman.
And to the men and women in the audience, he then starts giving out sex advice, which basically goes,
name sex.
You smell,
you can't get it up.
You can't get it up.
You prefer boys.
Classic stuff.
It's classic. I mean, he's clearly very sophisticated. This slightly cuts against what you're saying, to be honest, but I guess thinking about his poems in the round, there's one thing I didn't like about it, which I think we've already talked about, which is it does feel a bit bloodless sometimes. So maybe this is just by comparison to what we've got coming, which is extraordinarily enough, sort of takes this and then raises it to a whole new level. But the thing I like about it is he's quite self-deprecating. He's got that kind of, and maybe this is why he's popular in England for hundreds of years. He's able to laugh at himself. He's quite often makes himself the butt of the joke.
Do you think that might be a psychological defence mechanism because he is not from the class of people he's found himself amongst? It's difficult to psychoanalyse people from their extant writings, and a lot is missing, of course. It's very fragmentary. But, we look back...
Yeah.
I wonder...
He can't really big himself up too much because, Maecenas knows, and Augustus, they know full well that he's crawling around looking for a handout, and that he's is whose dad was once a slave. So yeah, maybe that's his way round it. A sort of sophisticated, ironic way of being in with the important crowd and saying, "Oh, I'm just Horace. Don't take me too seriously."
We might be transposing it, but it's hard not to see it like that.
Might be a bit of that, as you say, a defence
mechanism.
Yeah, but it's quite likeable. I think he comes across as quite a likeable chap, maybe.
Yeah, you think he'd be like... he's not coming to the dinner party.
No, I don't think he's coming to the dinner party.
We can come for drinks beforehand.
Well, no, you give him some leftovers afterwards, and he'll tug his frog and say, "Oh, that was jolly good of you. Oh, you remembered poor old Horace. Thank you so much," and send him on his way.
We've done your Christmas.
Yeah.
Your Christmas juice.
No, you're saying, look, Cicero's had a bit much to drink. He needs a lift home. He's got some interesting things to say about the Catiline conspiracy you might be interested in, as you boot them out and get onto the dessert course.
Quite well, yeah. He is self-deprecating, and that is quite possibly why I think in the round the English love him so much. Both because his pastoral poetry, his main poetry, is this love of nature. This
we
appeal,
love that stuff, don't we? Yeah.
We love all that stuff. We certainly did. In the sort of 18th, 19th century.
Until about Byron, right.
Yeah, and then I think also I go back to he is the smutty stuff that you find in the back of the thing, where you've learnt enough Latin. To
write it on the loo wall.
Well, you see, because obviously in translation you find that some of these are a bit bloodless. I think one of the translations I was looking at, it doesn't take... I don't have very good Latin, but I know enough from looking at the translation on the other page that what I was being given was a fairly tame reading of Horace.
That's a very good point. I think it's really important to get the right translation with this stuff, isn't it? Otherwise you're losing half the jokes.
And I think part of the love of Horace and his serious stuff is because generations were generations of Englishmen, and they were Englishmen at the time, at school, had copies of Horace where many of these Epodes weren't translated, but they had learned enough Latin to know they were absolutely filthy.
Disgusting,
and that's what they were doing in the back of the lesson. And so because of that, they admire Horace, their love of Horace comes from their love of the vulgar, and then later they read his serious stuff as if they are like, oh yeah, I've always been into Horace.
So you reckon
that's why I've got collections of his books everywhere.
So the Epodes are sort of, that's the entry level stuff, and then you get onto the
cannabis to your
crack.
To your crack. Yeah, so I think, but it's not just us. It's not just we, the English, who love Horace. It's an amazing story.
I love this story. Yeah. I thought this was really moving.
This was great, and quite a tone change from the smelly old toothless crone. Patrick Lee Fermor, is that how you think?
Yeah, big hero of mine.
So he set off to travel on foot to Constantinople in 1933. I think probably was Istanbul by then, but like Marathon and Snickers, I'll never acknowledge the change.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. Some change. Some of these.
Aztec would have changed it.
Some of you these renames, you have to accept. I mean, oil of Eule had to become oil of Ole. It couldn't go on like before. What
about opal fruit? Starburst.
No, don't know. That's
don't get me started.
Sif and Jif, okay, fine. But on foot to Constantinople.
I thought that's why they changed it
to Jizz. Someone
told me it was Jizz. and then they changed it to Sif because someone had written in and said, "Look, you do realise." Have I over romanticised that?
We may be going on a slight detour, but I believe that it is Jif. But of course, outside of the Anglo-Saxon world, the letter J is pronounced things like. So as a result, it was difficult to be a global brand, so they went for something which was easier. Although, funnily enough, of course, a Roman would have read it as Kif. Yeah, So, you didn't consider Horace when you renamed it, did you, Sif? So, anyway.
You idiots.
Fermor setting off on foot to Constantinople. You say he's a great...
he's a great travel writer of the 30s, and he packs his Horace, doesn't he?
He packs his Horace, yeah. He takes the Oxford Book of English Verse and a gift from his mother, the Loeb Horace Volume 1, which I think we've got lying around.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting because your mum gave me Juvenal. I don't know I don't know what to read into that.
Well, in Horace, Volume 1, it contains both the Epodes and the Odes, and as he walks across Europe, he memorised his favourite Odes. He had a lot of time by himself. He didn't have any podcasts in those days to listen to quality chat of two people surveying all of human literature, and as a result, you had to make your own fun, rather than let us make it for you. He was memorising, and this special relationship with Horace featured in Lee Fermor's most famous exploit, when he captured the German general Karl Creeper.
Right.
Or carpe.
I think it must be carpe.
Carpe,
yeah.
Commander on Crete, and had them smuggled out to Cairo. And as they climbed Mount Ida, Carpe muttered the first line of Horace's ninth ode, which is, and here's my schoolboy Latin going to struggle here, Vides et ut alter stet nue candidum soracte.
Vides ut alta stet nue candidum soracte.
Yeah. For a class, for someone who has no Latin,
I was made to learn this actually by my Greek teacher. Funny enough, because of this story.
Yeah, well, as I say, it's a bit rusty,
and also just in case I ever happen to get to join the Greek resistance against the Germans.
And it would have proved useful because that line, which you see how Mount Soracte stands white with deep snow, and Lee Fermor responded in Latin with the rest of the poem
because he'd learnt it.
So the captured German and the Englishman had caught him were able to just riff on a bit of Horace. And there's a quotation which how the story continues. The general's blue eyes had swivelled away from the mountain top to mine, and when I'd finished, after a long silence, he said, "Ah, so, Herr Major." "Ah, yes, Major." It was very strange, as though for a long moment the war had ceased to exist. We had both drunk at the same fountains long before, and things were different between us for the rest of our time together. So,
amazing
Horace,
moment in the height of war. He's just captured this guy.
But why it's so interesting is we said how Horace was considered by the Englishmen, the British at the time, to be their proto-English gentleman. The Germans thought the same, the proto-Germanic figure.
It's like Horace mit uns kind of thing.
He's the Junkers, the favourite classicist. So
you think Kruiper's kind of going, oh damn, I've just been captured by the resistance, but I'm a civilised chap and I know my Horace, and then he's just blown away by the fact that the guy who's captured him also knows it.
And the Englishman's going, I've just captured this filthy Bosch.
Right.
Quote a bit of Horace, obviously, an Englishman in heart.
Yeah.
And then and the Hun knows it, So
fascinating.
Through that, they sort of it was perfect encapsulation of their respective gentlemanly codes, and they established through Horace, presumably some quoting of their favourite dirty epos.
He doesn't tell you about that bit, does he?
But it's pretty implied in the text. A mutual understanding between these two officers, and they actually between them managed to piece together the conclusion to the Regulus Ode. When Roman General Regulus heroically insisted on going to meet his death at the hands of the Carthaginians, leaving Rome as nonchalantly as a man heading off for a relaxing weekend at his country house. So the two of them...
God, so I didn't know that part of the story. So basically, he's sort of saying it's okay because there's an ancient... You're the general that's just been captured, but it's okay because, just take it like a man, like this guy, what is called Regulus.
Regulus, yeah. Absolutely.
Amazing.
And so Horace became their sort of shared language. They both spoke English and German, one presumes.
Right.
But through their love of Horace, they amazing. They both survived the war, and they were reunited afterwards on Greek. This is your life.
Right, okay. And I think that footage is, you can go online, you can actually watch
available on
moment.
YouTube.
But
how did you meet?
Slightly awkward that. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously Fermor's dined out on this, and by the way, Fermor's a great drinker and thinker, and he has lots of great stories like this, but on this one, I mean, watch the footage online because it's cracking. You just see this moment in his eyes. Is he really pleased to see him? You're on This Is Your Life. You're expecting to meet, your long lost cousin or whatever, and then who do they wheel out? An aging Nazi. We've all the way from Buenos Aires. We have Obergruppenführer von Creeper. What? It's the last thing you want if you're on daytime TV is to be confronted with a wrinkly old Nazi, isn't it? Which is exactly why I would never go on if K.T. Hopkins ruled the world.
When your throat is parched with thirst, do you insist on having a golden tankard? When famished, do you turn up your nose at all but peacock and turbot? When your organ is stiff, and a servant girl or a young boy from the household is near at hand, and you know you can make an immediate assault, would you sooner burst with tension? Not me. I like sex to be there and easy to get.
So, for me, the next writers in our podcast take this stuff and take it to the next level. So we're talking here.
To 11.
They take it up to 11. This isn't just any old satire. This is hardcore satire, right?
This is Marks and Spencer.
This is yeah, exactly. We're about 100 odd years in the future from Horace. So we're well into the Empire by now, and we're talking about Juvenal and Martial. So first of all, Juvenal, he trained as a barrister, and he studied rhetoric under Quintilian, who we've talked about in our rhetoric podcast. And he also got in trouble with the authorities as a result of his scabrous poems, and he ended up being sent into exile. As so many of the great writers, we discover it's almost like that there are certain hurdles you have to go over to get onto our list, right? You have to study as a lawyer, you have to get in trouble with the law, and get sent to prison or sent into exile. You have to be a big drinker. And if you think about all of the big boys that we've been talking about so far, Cicero, Ovid, Seneca, we're about to talk about, it's just, this is what has, anyway, the same thing happened with Juvenal. There's one tradition that he was sent to Scotland in exile. I know,
Not because Scotland is beautiful for our Scottish listeners, because it's well
days,
beyond the Empire.
This is beyond the limits of the Empire, and we're talking about, a bunch of Picts covered in woad running around demanding subsidies, basically.
Freedom!
Speaking as a Scotsman, or at least a half Scotsman, I think they've got a point. But I love the idea that the
Is
Scottish...
your contention that you're allowed to say these things?
I can get away with it. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I love the idea that the Scottish satirical tradition, up to Billy Connolly, can trace its roots somehow back to Juvenal. That he taught them this back in the day. Anyway, he is a. I mean,
I'd love to see a biopic of Juvenal starring Billy Connolly.
Oh,
I never realised
that's a perfect voice for it.
I did until this moment.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, someone should write to Connolly.
If you're listening.
Yeah. You can have that one on us.
Yeah. Already commissioned.
I mean, and you think that someone like Billy Connolly or someone like Horace is satirical or cynical. My God, when you get to Juvenal, I mean, it is breathtaking, isn't it? It's like a cold shower suddenly when you read his poems. Or
he's a little bit cynical.
He's a little bit cynical. It's like having a quadruple whiskey after a fruit juice, isn't it? He just takes it to the next level. And it's so rude. So again, warnings. There's some trigger warnings here, But he survived amazingly. We keep talking about what are these monks thinking. Interestingly, one of the reasons that we think Juvenal survived, it was quite popular, we've got lots of different versions of it, is because he is so outrageous about pagan Roman society attacking it that the Christian moralists, even though he's totally obscene, they love it because it sort of shows that this is what they were.
My enemy's enemy is my friend. Yeah.
And I thought that was quite interesting to find out about. Anyway, he really lays it into he lays it on thick when he attacks the sort of decadent Romans. But he also laughs at the kind of pretensions of this idea of a kind of golden age. So the poem that we're going to talk about, which is his sixth satire, is probably his most famous one. It starts with this marvellous sort of thing about basically these days everyone's shagging everyone else, but in the good old days, when we used to live in mud huts, and we were really virtuous. But then he says, "Oh, but back in those days, your wife wouldn't cheat on you." Now, to be fair, she'd have had hairy tits, But so he's not. It's not a sort of simple attacking this sophisticated decadent urban society, because he also kind of loves it and he's part of it.
I think there's a great. He is absolutely poking fun on the idea of people say, "Oh, it was better in the past." Do you remember when you could leave your door unlocked?
Right.
And all that, and everyone died at age 35.
Exactly.
He's a Stuart Lee.
He is a Stuart Lee. Yes, yeah. He undermines himself deliberately. It's part of the sophistication of what he does, and I think that's part of the contraction of it.
People coming over there.
Exactly.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right. He sets out his stall early and he says, basically, it's hard not to write satire about this monstrous city that we live in. And then he goes on to attack literally everyone, everything, every profession, every aspect of society. He is an angry man, right? And he talks about how corrupt everyone is. He attacks in veiled terms, the regime. He attacks the morality of the people have at the time. And he writes in bracingly modern terms. We're not talking about old mythological subjects of the sort that Horace used to write about. Sorry, I have to pour myself another drink here. And one of his targets, which is interesting, that we're going to see again in Seneca and Petronius and Martial, is the sort of rising middle class of ex-slaves who are making money, and he's kind of impoverished aristocrat, I suppose. So he doesn't have any money, but he comes from an old family, right? And now he's far too snobby to get a job or anything like that, right? He doesn't get on his bike, but there are lots of people who are getting on their bikes, and he really hates them.
It's a disdain for the nouveau riche.
Yeah,
and that comes across in that wonderful couple of episodes in Downton Abbey where Ian Glenn turns up as the self-made man, and keeps on saying things like, "Oh, well, we'll buy a new house, it'll be fine. I've got plenty of money," and everyone's like sort of awkward looking, like they don't like because money and class is not the same thing. They're not the same thing in Britain of the 1930s, 1920s.
Yep.
They're not the same thing in Britain today, although it's become less of a thing, thank goodness. But it's certainly not the same thing. It's interesting, the same.
It's the same snobbery, isn't it? It's the same kind of the panic of a class that used to be in charge, and now because they can't dirty their hands with actually doing any work, are feeling under threat, and they're trying to invent ways that they're more sophisticated, invent ways of laughing at the nouveau riche, who are, to be fair, in Roman society, also ridiculous. So it's kind of it cuts both ways.
I want to table at this point, not for now, but a conversation at some point about whether our society is a return to the Roman morals and culture after the interruption of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And therefore, rather than us becoming decadent after proper,
is it just back to normal?
Is it back to normal, or is it normal? Is that the standard culture of humans, the default human that essentially the Judeo-Christian movement managed to displace
temporarily
for good or for ill? Because obviously there are many virtuous things about Judeo-Christian morality, or whether this is just a new wave of a cultural thing. Because obviously other cultures around the world don't look like ancient Greece and Rome. That's a fascinating conversation, probably not for right now, but it's one that I keep on thinking as we read the stuff, which is so modern.
Yeah, it's so. It's a really good question, isn't it?
To Rome.
So you're basically saying, the Christians come along, you're not even allowed to buggy a slave boy anymore. It's political correctness gone mad.
Well, actually, I think it's a really interesting point, because I think it's easy to view that Christianity, in some senses, is the traditional morality, and we. Now are slipping away and becoming more decadent in the 21st century.
It was completely opposite. If you go back to this,
that essentially Christianity is the is the Gilead movement, which takes over the whole of Europe and makes people puritanical to a lesser or greater extent, obviously in some places, but generally enforces that. Now, that isn't necessarily a criticism, except obviously in the Gilead sense. I'm a Christian myself, and also, one could talk about the very many great things which come from that, and that's not necessarily the endlessly buggering of flute girls being a necessarily good thing. But I think actually it's something which is, reading all of this stuff, has made me realise how transformative Christianity was. It's coming.
Yes.
What changed? How an entire continent, an entire culture was taken over by a religious dogma, albeit no criticism, a dogma I myself.
Well, and I think that's really interesting, because a lot of this stuff is about decadence, and it's about both a lampoon of decadence, a satire on decadence, but it's also a celebration of decadence. And my God, they were decadent. I mean, we have not got to that level, to these levels of decadence yet in our society. Well, and you can see where the Christian reaction comes from. Yeah. John and Anal, as they sail off into the sunset together, quoting quatrains.
Quoting Horace as they climb on the mountain.
Absolutely, yeah. If it's good enough for the Nazis, I don't see why. Anyway, I think that's a really interesting question. This comes back to the idea of bread and circuses as well, which is a phrase that Juvenal himself comes up with.
Really?
So, like Horace, we owe to Juvenal some of the things that we, some of these sort of phrases that have entered our language. The idea of bread and circuses being that, as Juvenal is sort of saying between the lines, because he can't openly attack the political structures of the day too badly, and indeed he gets sent into exile probably because he has sort of moved over that line a little bit. He basically, is looking back to the golden days where there was a republic. There isn't a republic anymore. We're living in a fascistic imperial dictatorship, but people don't seem to mind because they've got all the entertainment they want. They've got the gladiatorial,
well-fed, and there's good stuff on telly.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, think back to our pilot episode and one of the issues about Fahrenheit 451. The people are happy because there's stuff on the
it's
box,
absolutely Bradbury, isn't it? It's bread and circuses. And the other phrase that Juvenal came up with, as far as we know, that's certainly how it's entered our language, that you will possibly have come across, is the idea of who guards the guards. Yeah. Right? And quite often that is deployed.
If you've seen or better still read comments at Watchmen. Phrase Watchmen, it opens with the line, who guards the guards.
Yeah, and it's quite often
a classic episode of Star Trek Next Generation called Who Watches the Watchers.
Right, and it's usually deployed seriously like that. It's a kind of political point, isn't it? Funnily enough, that's not how Juvenal deploys it. What he's saying is, who guards the guards that you've put to guard your missus to stop her from shagging around, because actually she's just going to shag the guards.
Yes, this great observation of political import about
it's been totally taken out of context.
And as I will always notice as we go through on these things, as well as a classic Next Generation episode of Star Trek called Who Watches the Watcher, there's also a classic original series episode called Bread and Circuses. So Gene Roddenberry obviously
he
big
was
fan of
Juvenal.
Yeah.
There you go. This phrase about who guards the guards comes from his Satire 6, which is sort of it's like he read Horace book 1, Satire 2, and thought, is that all you've got, Horace?
Yeah.
You think that's rude? You think that you've been scurrilous about sexual mores and what women are up to? Wait till you see what I can do with it. And my God, I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it?
I'm glad you took this one, because it's misogynistic, anti-Semitic at one point.
Yeah, it is. That was interesting. Yeah.
And I was like, I'm glad, Alistair, over to you for this one, because it is.
It is deeply misogynistic. Although I would say that
it's funny.
It's funny. It's laugh out loud funny. And also, I'd say that he is misanthropic. I mean, he hates everyone.
Yeah.
He hates everyone. He's not particularly picking on women or Jews. Or so. He hates absolutely everyone, and everyone gets it in this.
Yeah. And actually, in the way that he is misogynistic and on one point of anti-Semitic, it's not anti-Semitism in a sort of 20th century, 21st century anti-Semitism.
He's saying it's acceptable anti-Semitism.
I'm not saying it's acceptable anti-Semitism, but his misogynistic thing, it's all like stuff down the pub. You know what's wrong with women.
Yes, it's got that tone to it.
Obviously, it's sharp stuff.
Yeah,
but it's in that context of things that men say about men. And of course, if he decided to write one for women, you get the impression that absolutely
he'd be completely
those barrels as well.
Yeah, indeed. So basically, he's writing to a friend of his who's fallen in love and is hoping to get married, and he's basically his advice saying, "Hang on a minute, what are you doing?" And he starts out with saying, "What? So are you not able to commit suicide? I mean, there are plenty of options." And he starts listing of how he could kill himself, because obviously that would be better than getting married. And then he starts to explain why. So, well, this is what's wrong with women, sort of thing. You do realise she will be cheating on you with, her servants, and with that actor that she met when she was in the theatre, and with the gladiator that she fancies. And should we be doing this, that, and the other? And it starts there, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. Yeah. And he talks about all the different sorts of women that he could be marrying and what's wrong with all them. I mean, interestingly, he also says, worst of all, it could be a virtuous woman who's not going to cheat on you at all. My God, imagine how boring she would be, right? So everyone gets it. And then he starts talking about men and how stupid they are about women, what idiots they are made to be. It's pretty brutal stuff, but it is laugh out loud funny. I've got to admit.
I was reading it on the train up here.
Oh no, right.
A bit of a packed train, and I was reading it on a tablet, so it was sort of fairly. There wasn't a way of subtly doing the thing you do with a sort of a book where you sort of can hide what you're reading.
Hide it inside the Evening Standard.
Sat next to a young woman who's clearly occasionally glancing over
in the way that you do when someone's really enjoying reading something.
I wanted to say it's fine. It's juvenile. I'm reading the classics, as if that makes it okay. And in a way that, of course, it does. We all understand that if you're reading something about buggery or something like that, it's fine, as long as the person who wrote it is now a marble bust in a museum.
Yes, exactly. But he may have buggered the slave boys against their will, but
that was not clear from the reading format I had, and I think she seemed quite uncomfortable.
You got tutted at for reading Juvenal. There you go. This is the world that we're living in today, right? No, I mean, he says some pretty nasty things. So, just to give you a flavour, there was one line that I thought was really good, where he said, your sluttish niece keeps having really messy abortions, and yet every lump of embryo looks just like her uncle. It's like, my God, how, this is the product of a diseased and angry mind, right? He's no Horace.
Something bad has happened.
Something is bad has happened. He's no Horace who's kind of basically pretty content with his lot in life. He is really, really furious. And it comes out.
The sort of person who reads this must have a sort of, for fun, might also sort of be said to have a sick and diseased mind. You're a member of something called the Juvenal Club, aren't you, if you attended last night.
Don't talk about that.
Is that because the first rule of Juvenal Club is that you don't talk about Juvenal Club?
Actually, funnily enough, the first rule of Juvenal Club is we don't talk about Horace.
Right. Okay.
So this is might take some explaining. Basically, I discovered that a friend of mine, ridiculously, is a member of something called the Horace Club or the Horace Society. I think the Horatian Society, and I just couldn't believe that there is such a thing. Apparently, the current Prime Minister, is also a member.
And I suspect
they get everywhere.
The Epodes rather than the other side. They get together.
Oh well, that's interesting.
And read the filthy poetry.
Giggling to themselves. And I was so angry to discover that there was this sort of inner circle that I wasn't a member of, and I thought, and also that they, of all the ancient satirists, they would choose Horace, who was my least favourite. So I said, right, damn it, I'm going to create the Juvenal Club and force my friend to be a member. And the first rule is we don't talk about Horace. Anyway, disastrously, boys, if you're listening, I know that we did actually have a meeting last night in which we talked extensively about Horace because I was preparing for this podcast, but let's never talk about Horace again because Juvenal is the man. And listeners, go out and set, across the country, across the world, set up branches of the Juvenal Club to celebrate the fact that Juvenal is clearly better than Horace and deserves to be remembered much more than he is. And start reading it on the train and laughing openly, and don't be ashamed if someone looks over your shoulder and is scandalised by what you're reading, because this stuff is damn good. There it is.
Well, you've convinced me. I'll see whether I can make the next meeting. I know, so I've not been invited to join the Juvenal Club.
Well, let's see whether you push Juvenal over the line at the end of this podcast, and maybe you'll get an invitation.
Well, you've already given us an indication of where you're placing. Horace is making the cut. So
my loyalties are with Juvenal here. I think he's brilliant. So, by the way, what were you doing last night?
I went to see The Divine Comedy, not a epic performance of the 3-part Italian 11th century, 12th century masterpiece by Dante.
I was going to say, who was playing Virgil in this? I'd love to see an adaptation of
Netflix, if you're listening.
Yeah.
Maybe Billy Connolly as Virgil.
It's got to be done. There is no shortcuts when it comes to the Divine Comedy, sadly.
However, it was actually a performance by the 1990s and beyond, in fact, band. Really one person with a band.
Yeah.
Son of a bishop, actually, interestingly.
Really?
Famous for the National Express Something for the Weekend, itself a song which is entirely about
prophylactics.
No, Stella Gibbons' Cold Comfort Farm. The lyrics are all about it. Yeah, Something in the Weekend.
Who's another legend who is?
We're not on the list. Should be on the list.
No, she's on the list. Yeah, of course she is.
So very good, superb.
Oh, I'm
so if you're listening at a time that they're touring or they've got another album out, I highly recommend it. Their new album, Office Politics, is out now.
Interesting.
Available from all good downloaders, one presumably. We don't have shops anymore, do we?
He's a good chap. Well,
pop into your local Virgin megastore.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, one of the things I like about him is that he definitely, he's read some of these books in his spare time, and he's got some references
stuff,
that,
superb singer, and also, the sort of person who'd be part of Juvenal Club.
He absolutely would be part of Juvenal. We'll send him an invite.
Neil Hannon, if you're listening, you're welcome to join Juvenal Club. Please write in. I thought you were great last night. Highly recommended. Nearly done.
Hey, take your time. It's not like we're live recording a podcast or anything. I'm on the phone. Diaulus, recently physician, has set up now as a mortician. No change, though, in his client's condition. It is great, this stuff, isn't it? So what I now worry about is that as a result of this podcast, someone is going to have to set up a Martial Club.
A Martial Club, yeah.
Because...
Well, I mean, if I don't get into Juvenal Club,
you're going to have to set up a rival Martial Club to which I'm not invited. I don't know what you thought about Martial. Martial was my favourite poem as a Roman poet when I was a schoolboy, sort of sniggering behind the bike shed. Because we've already said, if you think Horace is rude, wait till you get to Juvenal. If you think Juvenal's rude, oh my God, you haven't seen anything till you get to Martial.
I mean, by the point, obviously we've been doing a lot of reading and rereading recently, and I freely admit, we're talking about setting ourselves as experts to make this determination, but we've fully always agreed that we haven't read all of these things
until just before the podcast, basically.
Well, what we'll find is that one or either of us has certainly read them before. Nothing has got on the list which neither of us has read. But
that's true so far.
True so far. But but when we get to things like some of the Chinese classics,
they
are things that we should have read.
Yeah.
And many of them are things which I think it's come across before. I'm a fan of the historical period of the late Roman Republic and the beginning of the Empire.
You may have mentioned that, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with who many of these characters are, but knowing who Horace is,
and
it's not the same as having read all of Horace. And so Martial, I knew of him, never read any of it, and of course... Actually, we're back-to-back reading a lot of this. So just when you think it can't get any worse...
it can get worse.
So I just about finished on the Juvenal, and the woman there was deciding... She would have moved had there been anywhere else to sit down on the train. But so I cracked open the Martial. Thank God I had it in actual book form. And I sort of hid myself in the corner by the window as I read. Well, some pretty juicy...
Give us a taste of what you're talking about here.
I can't, because I haven't got the...
on your script. Okay.
Okay, I'll give you a bit of a taste.
No, please don't.
So, he's not subtle. So a couple of great lines. If from the bathhouse you hear a round of applause, Maron's giant prick is bound to be the cause.
But look, that's the whole poem in itself.
That is the entire thing. He is just firing them out there. We don't know much about Maron. We do know...
Well, presumably he was quite pleased with that poem. Because he's
obviously paid up.
Exactly.
So sort of a late antiquity version of Fiverr. You can pay for someone to do something for you. Another one, with your giant nose and cock, I bet you can with ease. When you get excited, smell the end for cheese. Again, not a line taken out of context, but you go,
That's
I don't
the
understand
whole
it.
poem.
That is the poem. He is, to my mind, like the Edward Lear
Right.
of a guy's so
If Edward Lear had written about cheesy cockheads, I think
it's all there. It's implied. The Owl and the Pussycat. No,
there was, once was a man from with a massive cheesy cock.
So, listeners, if you're not aware, Edward Lear, you probably have you've certainly come across the Owl and the Pussycat, and the other great poem, the Dong with the Luminous Nose.
Dong with the cheesy head.
Yeah. But he also is famous for writing, for popularising the limerick. Although, rather annoyingly...
Disastrously without the one thing that's good about limericks.
Yeah, so the first and last line of all of his limericks are the same, which means that there's only actually sort of one rhyme in it, and there's no punchline.
And therefore there's no punchline. Yeah, I've never understood why Lear is popular.
Lear has popularised the limerick, but all his limericks are shit.
Even my children, 2 and 4, are waiting for the delivery that never comes.
But the great thing about reading Lear is you can read it and then rewrite the end of every limerick and make it better.
Make it better,
make it better than the great man himself.
Indeed.
But however,
Belloc takes Lear any day. Well, we'll come to that possibly in a future podcast.
But Lear is this person who sort of is constantly firing out these little epigrams on anything he comes across.
So do you think that's the way he spoke, in his social life?
Yeah. I think you have Lear. Let's not invite Lear for dinner.
No,
much like I am a fan.
Edward, this is Adam. He comes from Portsmouth. There once was a man from Portsmouth.
Yeah.
That silly old man from Portsmouth.
Yeah.
Oh, well, great. Thanks. You really added something there.
Yeah, you'd get tired of it quite quickly.
Yeah.
But he is a great observer of human behaviour, of these little sort of vignettes of life. And
I think you're doing a big disservice to Marshall here.
No, I see Marshall.
You think Marshall might be an annoying, dinner party guest as well? Because
not at all.
You'd be constantly watching yourself because you're going to get an epigram coming your way.
It's more that observation of you're going to get it. If you meet Marshall,
you're going to get it. Yeah.
He is going to write something about you, and
you just hope that you're Maron.
Yeah, you're Maron rather than the man with the giant nose yet cheesy cock.
Oh, God.
I mean, they could be the same person. I mean,
that's
Maron
possible.
Could have,
Maybe you didn't pay enough afterwards, and he's like, right, okay, you may have a giant cock, but you've also got a big nose, and your cock's cheesy, and you can all smell it.
I mean, it's classic stuff, isn't it? It's wisdom for the ages from Marshall.
But just to again take issue with your thing about Lear, the thing that I find quite moving, really, about this, is that it's not just filth of the highest order. It is of the highest order. I mean, it is incredibly well crafted and well polished.
It's clever.
It's clever. It's so tightly written. I mean, there isn't a line, a word, even a syllable in here that could be cut that he hasn't cut. He's trimmed it down to the very essence of poetry.
Well, again, of course, we're reading in translation.
Sure.
And I think from reading the introductions to the books to make sure, you're always trying to read the translator's introduction. And then sometimes they're quite interesting. And they point about exactly that I have to rely on the translator, he's done a good job. And they will always talk. When it comes to Marshall, you've got to bring your A game.
Yeah.
Because I've got to be as funny in a different language as something, as Latin, which has fewer syllables generally,
and it's got to be poetic, right?
And it's got to absolutely hit the same tone.
And quite often the translations, I've noticed, are sort of 2 or 3 times the length of the original because it's so tightly.
So tense,
this stuff is tighter than a badger's backside. Although there, you could just see Marshall turning his grave and say, he would never say badger's backside. He'd say badger's butt, wouldn't he? He would just trim and trim and trim, and it's like a kind of rapier that he's fighting with. He's not. Juvenal is kind of bludgeoning you with a blunt instrument, and Marshall is hitting you with something very, very sharp. But it's quite charming as well. There's a particular voice to it. I think he's maybe not quite as angry as Juvenal, but he's as cynical.
Juvenal's the angriest man. Horace is the forerunner. Horace is interesting because we focused on the exception to Horace's work, the work that he's most famous for his actually serious stuff.
Yes, and he's not famous for the Epodes. That's not what. Although possibly, as you say, the Horatian Society.
Epodes, and we find them funny, and we see the Epodes as kind of like taken to the next level, up to a level we thought by Juvenal.
Yes,
Juvenal, an angry man. Marshall, as you say, filthier still, but actually in a sort of...
It's a bit more charming, possibly.
Yeah, a bit more charming, a bit more sedate. Marshall might make it for dinner.
I think I'd rather have Marshall than Juvenal for dinner, because Juvenal would be, for a start, he'd be stuffing the food in his pockets to take home. We're pretty much clear from that. Actually, probably Marshall would be as well. But Marshall... Exactly. But it's interesting that they were friends with each other.
Oh, really?
So they probably had dinner with each other. So, and there are
Horace
poems.
was there, but he didn't write it down.
yeah, exactly. I missed that. So, there are poems from Marshall to Juvenal, and they're quite, and there's a poem. It's quite a nice one. It's late Marshall, so he's a bit less acerbic, but he retires back to his sort of farm in Spain, and he sends Juvenal some nuts for Saturnalia, which is the Roman Christmas. Says enjoy these, and then he sort of teases him and says, "Oh, Juvenal, you're a bit of a pederast, aren't you? Ho ho ho, jolly James, But I've got a good cushy thing going on here. Come and visit me on my farm, kind of thing." And you can just imagine Juvenal opening this, poem and going, "Oh God," and getting even more angry. He's like, "Oh fucking hell! Even Marshall's got a farm now, and I'm still stuck, sliming round, sucking up to people and writing poems." And you could just see him making even more angry. Anyway, I think it's nice that they were mates, and I'm not sure I'd have either of them to dinner, but I would love to sit in the tavern with them late at night and swap, those two and maybe Edward Lear, and and get him to improve his technique.
We should probably invite Horace, shouldn't we? But Horace and Lear would be probably left talking to themselves.
Why, you may ask yourself, does the notorious Maura sniff at the air in that knowing, derisive fashion as she and her dear friend Tullia pass by the ancient altar of chastity? What, pray, is Tullia whispering to her? Here, at night, they reel from their litters. Here they relieve themselves, pumping out their piss in long bursts on the goddess's statue. Then, the moon watching their motions, they ride each other in turn, and finally go home. So you, on your way next morning to some great house, will splash through your wife's piss.
But I tell you who will not be at this dinner,
Go on, then.
which is, I think it's time to get on to the honourable mentions for this week, right?
Yeah.
Which is, and we're not talking about poetry anymore here, we're talking about prose. But we're still in the realms of satire, and these are contemporaries of Martial and Juvenal. But instead of people like Martial and Juvenal who are desperately trying to claw their way onto the very bottom ladder of society and being really furious about it, we're talking about people at the top here, right at the top, but no less precarious. We're talking about Seneca and we're talking about Petronius. I'm going to hand over to you here because I think you're stronger on the sort of historical background, but these boys are in the dinner party with the real, with the emperor. They're right there at the top.
Yeah, high class. They got nothing to prove. They're from, as you said, the highest epoch of society.
Right.
The honourable mention we've gone for is, and I'm going to have to look at how we pronounce it no, let me think about this. Apocolosyntosis of Claudius.
It's deliberately a mouthful.
Apocolosyntosis, which was originally translated the Gourdification, but because we're less familiar with Gourd, is now generally in translation called the Pumpkinification of Claudius.
Right.
Of the Emperor Claudius. Okay? The Pumpkinification, there's a new word.
That's a new
The
one.
becoming a pumpkin. And it's a play on words about the apotheosis, which means the becoming of God, of Claudius. When Tiberius dies, his great nephew, I think, Caligula, becomes. I might not be exactly right about the fact. It gets a bit.
It's
messy.
a hero of yours, isn't it, Caligula?
Oh, I loved it.
A real statesman.
Yeah, Caligula, and Caligula starts off very, very popular.
There's a good shortcut. There's a cracking film with Helen Mirren and is it Malcolm McDowell?
Malcolm McDowell. Yeah. Well, what a film!
Absolutely. And they. This was the film where they. And it's actually perfectly historically accurate if you follow Tacitus and Suetonius, who we're going to come to on a subsequent podcast. But they basically bust in a whole bunch of porn stars, and so they would film the actors during the day, and then without telling them that this was the kind of film they were making, they bust in some porn stars to do some real proper orgy kind of scenes. So if you want to know what a Roman orgy looks like, that is the shortcut. Go and take out the director's cut of the film Caligula. I can't recommend it enough.
Anyway, Augustus had been worshipped as a god during his life, which he was probably loving it, but he was politically playing a game. When he died, Tiberius' first act was to declare him that, essentially to formalise this process, that we would worship Augustus now as a god. Okay?
Right.
Initially just to the east, but it starts spreading in. When Tiberius dies, his successor Caligula does the same thing, and Tiberius is declared a god. And what there is this imperial cult happening, which 100 years ago would have been impossible to imagine.
So now every emperor is automatically assumed they're going to be a god, is it?
Well, yes, it seems like that. So Caligula was an absolute tyrant. He went insane. Suddenly got up to
shagged his sister. I mean, he was absolutely
murdered.
Elected a horse to the Senate.
He did absolutely. So all these things, and eventually he was murdered by the Praetorian Guard. And his uncle became emperor, who was a bit of an interesting character. The Emperor Claudius conquered Britain, sort of finally. He probably had polio. They used to think, but maybe cerebral palsy is the general thinking. So he spoke with terrible stutter. He's the main character in Robert Graves' two-part novel I, Claudius, and Claudius,
which is excellent.
But he was basically an older man, clearly with some sort of physical and mental impairment.
Right.
But he's actually a very successful emperor for a while.
And he was a historian, wasn't he? He wrote history, which doesn't survive, sadly.
Now, he was eventually toppled by his second wife, who murdered him by poisoning a plate of mushrooms.
Right.
And her son, so his stepson, becomes the Emperor Nero, who we think is a terrible tyrant, was initially very poor.
Right.
The point was that when Claudius died, this person with physical and mental impairment that had been basically overthrown and kind of, whilst he'd done some great stuff, had been killed by a woman. Seneca then goes, what, are we making him a god? So the pumpkinification of Claudius, and I know that was a long backstory, is...
No, but that's explained, because I couldn't understand why this was such... Why would you pick on this poor guy who's just died?
Claudius is not the worst of them.
Right.
The point is, are we now just saying that anyone who happens to be head of state is essentially now declared a god?
And he actually puts that argument into the mouth of Augustus, which is that's how he gets away with it without it being an overt attack on the imperial system.
So the pumpkinification of Claudius is essentially what is an account of what happens when Claudius dies. A little bit of echoes of the Divine Comedy that we'll come to, and his journey through the underworld on his way up to Mount Olympus to be made a god, and essentially the objections being raised against that by the gods, including Augustus himself, who of course has been voted a god by the Roman Senate. Seneca's going, what? This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it has a very political point in there, and what he's trying to say is essentially it's a criticism about have we returned to being a monarchy.
But this is the fascinating thing, is that he's writing for the new emperor, Nero. He's not going to get in trouble with Nero for this, because it seems like this is sort of aimed at Nero, for Nero to laugh along with it. Sort of, oh, my silly old predecessor, Claudius.
Well, yes, because of course Nero thinks that he'll be voted a god after his death in his own right.
The thing that struck me about this pumpkinification, by the way, it's very short and easy read, it's only 10 pages long or so, isn't it?
And easy to understand.
It's totally easy to understand. Once you've got that historical... you need that background, but once you've got that, you've got it. I have to say, I didn't enjoy it in the way that I enjoyed the Martial and the Juvenal.
But you didn't have the background.
But partly because I have that background, and maybe I should reread it now that I've got that, because it was angry, but in I thought, quite a charmless way, because this is the guy who's at the pinnacle of Roman society writing this, and he's basically laughing at this chap who... Now, maybe I've been influenced by the Graves into thinking that Claudius is a sympathetic character, and we have a very different take now on people who, fortunately, we have a very different take on people who have, physical impediments or whatever.
He's making fun of the stutter.
He makes fun of the stutter, and it just feels like he's picking on a dead guy with a stammer in order to get a laugh out of an horrific dictator who he's sucking up to. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit uncomfortable.
It's definitely that, and I think you're right. The Graves makes a problem, because Robert Graves' Claudius novels are so well known and known from television adaptation.
It's like Derek Jacobi, isn't it? I can't stop thinking, poor old Derek Jacobi, leave him alone.
What did Derek Jacobi ever do? Well, he was the master.
Right.
But I think it's difficult because, when you say Claudius, you think of him, he's one of the good ones.
Right. Relative to who came before and after.
Augustus is complex, but I kind of, you can't help admire Augustus. Tiberius, you recognise there's different opinions. He's a bit of a tyrant. He's probably
like raped babies and stuff. I mean, he's not a nice chap.
Yeah, he's not a nice chap, but he's probably the victim of a bit of a smear. So he's a complicated character too.
But it's hard to defend either Caligula or Nero.
Caligula or Nero, you can't defend. Claudius, of all of them,
right,
seems like, he just found that he was the emperor. You
could imagine having dinner with him. You wouldn't order the mushrooms. The other thing is, Seneca's got, if we are to take him on face value, he's got an axe to grind, because he basically says in the Pumpkinification, Claudius goes up to heaven and he sort of thinks he's about to be turned into a god, and then the god Augustus makes, as you said, this speech where he says, "Oh my God, we can't have riffraff like this turning into gods. That's ridiculous. People will stop believing in gods if we do this." And they chuck him out and then chuck him to hell, where interestingly Caligula is waiting. So Caligula's obviously gone the wrong way as well. And then he's sort of put on trial, and against him, people say, "Oh well, you killed the following people."
Here they are.
So exactly. So he goes to hell and says, "Oh look, hello, so and so, so and so, so and so. What are you doing here?" And they say, "Well, you sent us here because you killed us, because you were a tyrant, basically, and you executed us." Now, it is disputed, historically speaking, how much of a tyrant Claudius was. We do know that he exiled Seneca, so Seneca had a personal beef with him. He was sent into exile after being accused, basically, of sleeping with Claudius' sister-in-law, right? So
it's always the Claudians.
They
get around.
Yeah, well,
this is a couple of generations on from Claudia, but it's
still
it's the same family.
And so all of these poets have been writing about these people. They did get around. Claudius is dead. We can breathe a sigh of relief, and now Nero's in charge. Hooray! And you just think, this is not going to end well. This is not going to end well for you, Seneca, and it's not going to end well for Nero.
They didn't know that at the time.
But I think that adds another layer of enjoyment to this, actually, that it is so fraught with irony, because what's actually going to happen, we know, is that Nero is going to go mad, is going to become much more tyrannical than Claudius ever was, and he's going to cause Seneca to be killed.
It's almost as if the Pumpkinification of Nero had been written under the Emperor Vespasian.
Right.
He's the next after emperor. We have a few
after the
Petronius and Otho after the year before. But the next one, if you'd written that, you'd gone, yep, that makes perfect sense. Clearly, it's about time that someone says, surely we're not just making everyone emperor because there's a new break, there's a new. It doesn't. It comes one earlier than that.
Yes,
and that's quite interesting.
It is interesting, but I don't think this extra layer of irony, which makes you appreciate this more, necessarily makes you like Seneca, because, as I say, it comes across as a bit smug, and if anything, it reduced my sympathy for him. He was very popular through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period as this sort of, because he was a philosopher and a statesman as well as a satirical writer, and he died famously. He died as a philosopher. So there's this story of him. Nero turns against him. He realises he has to kill himself. He slits his wrists basically, and then it's not killing him fast enough. His wife slits her wrist as well, by the way. It's not killing him fast enough. The soldiers are on the way to finish him off. He has to get in the bath. He's got his friends around him, and he sort of starts talking in philosophical terms about what it feels like to die. It's a bit like Socrates. It's this brave philosopher's death. It's a bit like Socrates with the hemlock. Although, by the way, the soldiers get there in time, it seems, if we believe Tacitus, to rescue Mrs. Seneca, and they sort of bind up the wounds and she survives.
Which Marshall would have a word with, you're marrying someone, you can't even...
She obviously didn't really mean it, did she? She obviously didn't cut herself very deeply or whatever. I mean, but the other thing is, you kind of think, Seneca, I'm not saying you asked for it, but there's a bit of hypocrisy here. Also, speaking as a Londoner, it's worth pointing out that the first Great Fire of London, which was, of course, caused by Boudica, who revolted against the Romans, came in on a chariot on the A1 and burnt the place down. The reason she was pissed off, it is deemed that the initial cause of the revolt was all Seneca's fault, because basically he raised interest rates and all the Brits were massively in debt and they couldn't pay the debt, so they revolted. So he's got a lot to answer for, basically, Seneca. I'm not sure. I think this is an interesting read, but I'm not sure it's a very sympathetic one.
I think it's interest to me. I think maybe worthy of keeping. Controversial. I agree with everything you said. It's not the best thing we've read, but I think its historical context
makes it so interesting, because he's right at the heart of the politics, isn't he?
Because he's right at the heart of that, and it is that moment where they realise finally we're a monarchy. And Rome has truly fallen.
Yes.
And I think it took until Claudius for that to be the case. There was still a route back.
So there might have been some hope, and now there really isn't.
Yeah.
And as you say, when Nero is finally killed, it's striking that there's no kind of serious attempt to resurrect the Republic.
No.
But there's someone else who would have known Seneca well, I assume, who is also at the epicentre of this sort of political storm, and is also writing satire.
Another honourable mention, you think?
Another honourable mention goes out to Petronius, who, you were saying that Maecenas was basically the sort of minister of culture for Augustus. Petronius is the sort of, he's not quite minister of culture, he's sort of minister for dandyism, I suppose you could say.
Important role.
An important role, one that I aspire to.
I think, is the current Leader of the House and Minister for Dandyism.
I think, he would have to be a lot better dressed than Rees-Mogg with his baggy, double-breasted suits, because...
Oh, you've seen him in Tales.
Petronius is a sort of trendsetter, though. He's kind of he's a kind of high fashion. I think he's a sort of an Oscar Wilde, Beau Brummel kind of character. There's this lovely description of him in Tacitus again, who says this: Petronius spent his days fast asleep and his nights attending official duties, so that by his dissolute life he'd become as famous as other men who were men of energy had become, but he was regarded not just as a profligate, but as an accomplished voluptuary. He worked his way into the inner circle of Nero's intimates, and until he was looked upon as an absolute authority on the questions of taste in connection with the science of luxurious living. He didn't fling away life with precipitous haste, but eventually, basically the same thing happens. He's a sort of toady, sucks up to Nero, he gets put in the inner circle, but then Nero turns against him, and he ends up having to kill himself. And
often the way.
It's often the way. It ends badly again. But what's interesting is he has a sort of, it's like a kind of mirror image of the way that it goes for Seneca, because instead of dying in this very pompous philosophical way, he lives up to his billing. He dies in a way that displays taste, right? So he's cracking jokes. He gets his friends round for a sort of light-hearted meal and banter, and I think this is marvellous. Again, so Tacitus describes it. He didn't fling his life away with precipitous haste, but he made a few cuts in his veins, and then, according to his good humour, he tied them up and then opened them again slowly while he was talking to his friends. Not about serious topics, he's not talking about philosophy here. He's just, coming up with poetry and playful verses, and then he gives presents to some of his slaves, has a few others flogged. I mean,
you've got to get the housekeeping sorted.
You've got to have the housekeeping sorted. He has dinner, and then he sort of just says, "Oh, I'm sleepy now," and he goes to sleep and dies. And I think this is a wonderful moment, and in a way, I sort of respect him. Yeah, I think this is good. This is a good death that has, been passed down for 2,000 years. His final act is he basically writes a list of who's sleeping with who, seals it, and sends it to Nero. I think that's absolutely a brilliant way to go. And there's one other story. This isn't in Tacitus; it's in Pliny. He says that Nero had some sort of incredibly expensive crystal drinking cup that was worth 300,000 sesterces, an absolute fortune, and that presumably this would have been passed around or would have been deployed at these debauched, decadent dinner parties where Petronius was co-hosting with Nero, and he smashes it so that no one can use it after he's used it. And I think that's another, it's a great way to go. Anyway, before he dies...
He's not going to my dinner party.
The reason he's not going to the dinner party is... But he writes possibly a book about the most famous dinner party in literary history, because we don't have the full novel, but he basically wrote a novel called The Satyricon. It's a satirical novel about the decadence of Rome. But it celebrates it because that's the kind of chap he was. He loves this stuff. Again, he's sort of taking the piss out of the nouveau riche, shall we say, and people who have no taste. So one of the fragments that survives that we've looked at is the dinner party of Trimalchio, who's this ex-slave who's now very rich, and he's got a sort of Heston Blumenthal sort of chef who can create dishes that look like one thing but they're actually made from another.
Okay. And
he invites lots of people round, and they get absolutely tanked, and they're eating all these dishes. But Trimalchio himself is a ludicrous figure, and he's portrayed as incontinent. He's constantly having to say, "Stop eating, I need to go to the loo," and they have to sort of talk to the other guests, who are all these very, very nouveau riche, vulgar people that got terrible chat.
Doesn't it sound like Petronius is a bit of a bore?
But again, it's a bit uncomfortable, because Petronius is at the very pinnacle of society, so the fact that he's laughing at these people, he's sort of laughing down rather than telling a joke up, so again, it's a bit less likeable. Anyway, it is interesting because it is one of the very first pieces of writing we have that could be described as a novel, and the only other novels we have really from the ancient world are, in my view, absolutely hopeless. They're all sort of unlikely romances about twins being separated by sea nymphs, and then one of them gets a witch to come up with a love potion that it's that sort of stuff. It's really difficult to read. Whereas this is clearly about the real world, real society. It's taking the piss out of people who would have been recognisable types.
Yeah, so groundbreaking.
So it's groundbreaking. I'm not sure how. It's groundbreaking, but unpleasant. I think is
like the Seneca.
I think it's got a similar problem to the Seneca. Yeah. Anyway, there's an interesting postscript about this, which is that F. Scott Fitzgerald, who we're going to come to in a subsequent podcast,
author of The Great Gatsby.
The Great Gatsby is one of the possibly the most famous American novel that there is.
Never read it.
Well, you're going to.
I'm going to read it.
And it's a classic. He wasn't originally going to call it The Great Gatsby. He wanted to call it The Trimalchio of West Egg. And then presumably his publisher said, "Not sure that's a very good title. Have you considered The Great Gatsby?" And he never looked back.
As a man who's not read it or seen any film, I think Trimalchio of West Egg might have maybe picked it up a few years earlier. So I'm not sure I agree with you.
Well, it would be I think it would. You'd had to know your Petronius or have listened to this podcast at least in order to have appreciated that title. But yeah.
His last words heard on earth came after he'd let off a louder noise from his easiest channel of communication. "Oh my, I think I've shit myself." For all I know, he did. He certainly shat on everything else.
Those are our honourable mentions. Time to sort of throw this out and say, what did you like out of the things that the writers that we've read this podcast, and who would you save?
It's hard, and the reason it's hard is that they're quite samey.
Right.
And I think we've discussed that before, that that Horace is sort of the inspiration for Juvenal, who's sort of the inspiration for Martial. They're worse than each other in some ways, or better than each other, depending on what you like. And it was, as I was, reading them this week, I was thinking, gosh, trying to make a few notes and stuff. But I was like, was this Horace? Was this Juvenal? Even about 5 minutes ago, I think I said Martial when I meant Juvenal.
Right.
That makes it quite difficult for me to have a strong thing. So the tradition is obviously incredibly important and needs preservation. People should engage with it. They're short, they're easy, they're fun.
If you want some Roman decadence, you want to know what Roman decadence was all about.
Yeah, the Juvenal and Martial, great fun, and the Horace, just for a bit of a laugh. The non-serious stuff. I mean, I've made the point that the Seneca, to me, I think is a historical,
got some political importance to it.
But it doesn't make any sense outside of that context. If you're reading this podcast because you want to be more well-read.
Yeah.
And you want to take off some of the classical ones, you want a flavour of the classical world, forget the Seneca, forget the Petronius.
Right.
They're worthy, they're quite interesting for students of the period because they are an insider view, problematic if you like, but historically important. I don't know, I would recommend that we should get the collected works of Roman satire.
Right,
I know that's a cheat,
but
I think that there's not much in it between these three.
Yeah.
I know it's a cheat, but I'd go for the collected works of Roman satire because they give you a flavour, but they're much of a muchness. That's doing them. I know Juvenal Club member, Horace Club member. I don't. Right. I can get that there are people who are deeply passionate and would make a huge argument. But for our listeners, basically, this podcast is about filthy Roman satire. And I'm not sure that I can pick much between them on the basis that we've been looking at the rude poems.
Yes, and there are other works by these writers. Seneca wrote plays and Horace wrote lyric poetry and so forth, and they're more famous.
On that basis, Seneca, who's the more worthy writer?
He's the bigger figure and the bigger figure. Versatile.
I suppose if I had to go for one, Juvenal.
Yeah, I think it's
Juvenal because it's.
You're welcome to join the Juvenal Club.
Juvenal because it's scabrous, it's funny. It is angry, which makes it hilarious in a way that Martial, who is worse, lacks that, and Horace, who I think has some of the ones that I thought were great zingers.
Right.
But you can you possibly already know as much Horace as you need to know, even if you don't know that you know it's Horace and you've never heard of Horace.
Right, like carpe diem.
Carpe diem.
It's interesting. I think for me it's probably the Juvenal and the Martial, and the thing I like about them is
you can't mock me for saying 3, but you
just giving 5 in it. But the point is that they get. It's hard to know. I can't, as a Juvenal Club member, I can't ditch Juvenal. But the thing I love about Martial is that he gives you. Well, they both do. Join
my Martial Club.
I'll join the Martial Club. I'll let you into Juvenal Club if I can join your Martial Club. They give you a more rounded sense of the whole of Roman society because they're not just talking to and about the patricians. They're also talking about guess what happened in the bathhouse or I got ripped off by a guy in a pub sort of thing. And I think that gives you more of a kind of rounded knockabout sense of the society in a way that is extremely enjoyable. And
you agree with me though? If we could, and we can't, against the rules, but if we could take in,
I think I completely agree. And why isn't
the best of Roman satire? I'm sure there is. Yeah. It's just we're doing
just
this author
by
word.
I know, and so it's tough, isn't it? People already know that I've got a beef with Horace, so I'm happy to ditch Horace. I think I've said I don't like. I think there's something a bit uncomfortable about the satire of Seneca and Petronius. Although it has to be said, they did end up. The joke was on them in the end, so there's some interesting irony there. I love Juvenal Martial.
I think more people have heard of Nero than Seneca or Petronius.
Yeah, possibly. I think that's true. That is true.
Not necessarily for good things, though.
Not necessarily for good things. I would be really interested to know what our listeners think. Do get in touch and tell us what you like, what you don't like, and who you think should go through. It's worth mentioning in terms of the Penguin Classics, which is the ones that I've been looking at here. Well, we're talking about the translations, right? The translations really matter here. Yeah. We've been very much enjoying the translations in the Penguin Classic versions, the relatively recent ones. So Peter Green doing the Juvenal, and we have got, which I thought was particularly magnificent, the Martial. Which is translated by James Mitchie. I thought the Horace I was much less pleased with. He cuts out some of the dirty jokes, some of the really dirty ones. So I wasn't so sure about that. There may have been a more recent edition with a different one.
It's worth saying, as with all our things, we're going to put down what the actual reading is and the text that we did on our website.
Yeah.
But I think in particular in this case, if you were to go away and walk into a shop and say, I want to buy some Horace, you'll come back wholly disappointed with us. We will post the dirty, filthy...
The one that you need,
We will make the list of the particularly... Not the worthy ones, the ones that you want to know what we're talking about.
Yes, exactly.
And we will... And if we can find... there are some online versions as well. If we can, we'll put a link to the websites to see...
That's a good idea. We could do that, couldn't we? Yeah.
Because this is one where... Literally, you can read this in a couple of hours if you're just hitting the ones which are about smelly, cheese-headed, blowjobs.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah. You could get a flavour of this stuff very, very quickly.
Well, I'm not sure I want a flavour of that.
Oh, and by the way, you could get usually the Petronius comes with the Seneca because it's Seneca so short as a sort of bonus track, so you can get them both in the same edition if you want to get those in one. In a way, maybe shortcuts. Again, we don't really need shortcuts because some of this stuff is literally 1 or 2 lines long. So
there are a few shortcuts to the actual text themselves. There's a whole host of cinema and other things based on the era. And Claudius is great, but.
And there's the 70s, the 70s TV version of Epigrams. I haven't watched that yet, but I'm really looking forward to that.
It is great, but it's
a bit dated.
It's a bit dated now.
Right. And also it's got Brian Blessed as Augustus. What on earth was that? What are they thinking?
Of casting.
Oh. I mean, love Blessed, obviously,
that's great.
As the sort of nuanced, the whole point about Augustus, he's not the larger-than-life character. He's
I think the idea is that's how
background.
Claudius saw him as a child. That's the kind way of interpreting that piece of casting. But I'm not sure there are any shortcuts to the poetry itself, but I think they are so short. The ones that are interested in people doing, look at our webpage. Where you found this podcast, you will find the list. If possible, and we can find royalty-free versions of text, we may even be able to put something up.
And if that's absolutely right, and if you're interested in late 60s or early 70s pornography, there's a Fellini film of the Satyricon, which is basically wall-to-wall nudity, and there's also, as we've described, there's the
coming
Caligula,
to Disney Plus soon.
Yeah, with the actual porn scenes. But I'm not sure I'd recommend either of them as films, or I'm not sure you're
pornography.
I'm not sure you're going to learn the nuances of the political situation from watching either of those.
Right. Well, as I say, this is one where we really do want your opinion. I noticed you weaseled out of actually giving the final answer. So while he's thinking about I'm going to hold you to account.
I'm saying I'm going to go with Juvenal and Marshall. That's my.
You can't do that. You're saving both.
I'm saving both.
We can't because
we don't have enough. We don't have enough room. You think?
I don't think we've got enough room.
I can't do without Marshall. But but the Juvenal Club will kick me out. Oh.
Well, I voted for Juvenal anyway, so it's Juvenal or nothing.
Well, all right, Juvenal goes through.
Marshall is consigned to the flames.
Oh, no!
See it burn in front of you.
Oh!
If we made the wrong decision, listeners, do write in and tell us. You may not have read any of them before, but hopefully by next week or the next couple of days you can square that away and tell us if we should be picking out the embers and trying to piece together the filthy bits that we remember.
Absolutely.
And of course, especially this week, if you fancy your go at writing satirical, filthy poems, both to your friends.
Send us an epigram.
Send us an epigram. Send us an epode that you've written about you and Nobby.
Ode to your last ex-girlfriend. And John, if you're listening, if you could recreate Ode to Anal Storm, I think we would all be interested.
Anal, if you're listening, please photocopy it, send it in.
I would like to know what Anal's. Did she have a response to John in verse form? And I would love to read.
Maybe she's just working on a 12-volume book of epic poetry. The Johnny ad.
It's a horrible thought.
and on that bombshell, I think I need another drink.
Absolutely, great minds drink alike. Cheers.
Cheers.
Jolly good. I'm sorry that we cracked it at the Juvenal Club last night. We cracked into the wine, so we usually more or less run out of the the Brindisian wet dream. But I can always give. There's plenty more booze if you need a.
When something happens to me, or when I'm older, my children and grandchildren will have 150
you are beside
hours
me.
of me just being
laughing about cheesy cocks.
Yeah.